Okay, so a big welcome to everybody. My name is Liam, and I'm the CEO of Professional Counselling and Psychotherapy Seminars Ireland. And tonight I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Bonnie Badenoch. You're very welcome, Bonnie.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here, Liam. Really lovely. I'm in Washington State, clear on the other side of the world, and it's lovely we can do this.
Oh, great. And I was just saying that I think we're really in for a rich evening because Bonnie is, I've been really kind of looking at your work over the last few weeks and over the last few months. And I must say you really integrate a lot of the work of people that I admire a lot, like Dan Siegel and Stephen Porges and Ian McGilchrist. And I think as well, you do work with paths, which is, a big part of the work I really like as well. So I just have a few practicalities to read out, Bonnie, before we get going. Just to say, if anybody has any issues with tech issues, that what we would suggest the easiest thing to do is just to log off and log back on again with the link provided. And if the issues persist, what we would recommend is that you'd contact Mary. Mary's email is mary@pcpsi.ie. And one of the things we're going to do tonight, we're probably going to leave about 15 or 20 minutes for Q&A. And one of the things we started doing, which I think really enriches the experience of the webinar, is that we like people to come on and ask questions about what we're discussing or about the webinar series that we're doing in May and June. So if you want to come on, what we would suggest is that at the bottom of your screen, there's a raise hand function. And if you press that, I'll be able to see who has risen their hand, and I'll call you in then. And when I do call you in, what you'll need to do is you need to turn on your camera and unmute yourself, and you'll be able to talk to Bonnie then, which would be great.
Yes.
But again, we totally appreciate that not everybody likes to come on and not everybody likes to be on live. So please feel free to send in any questions that you have using the Q&A function again, which is at the bottom of the screen. And tonight it's a free webinar, but if anybody wants to get a CPD cert, you'll be able to purchase them afterwards. So Mary, you might put up that link in the chat function, please. And just to say, tonight is an introduction for a webinar series that we're doing in May and June. So we kick off on the 1st of May, and it's a 5-webinar series every Saturday for 3 hours. And we go the 1st of May, the 15th of May, the 22nd of May, the 5th of June, and the 19th of June. And we would love people to join us. As I say, it's been really an enriching experience for me over the last few months, really kind of familiarizing myself with Bonnie's work. It's really kind of very rich body of work, and I'd say it's taken many, many years to put together. And for me personally, anyway, it makes a lot of sense, Bonnie. So thanks for that. So maybe to start, I usually like people to introduce themselves, Bonnie, just to tell us a bit. You told us where you are in the world, but maybe tell us a bit about who you are, where you've come from, and how you got to be the person you are at this point in your life.
Boy, that's a very big question, Liam, and I'm really happy to speak to that a little bit. It really goes way back. I had a pretty rough childhood and had a great deal of trouble getting decent therapy for many, many years. And then in my late 40s, I finally got the help that I needed, and it really caught me on fire of wanting to be able to offer that to other people. So I went back to school yet again and got a marriage and family therapy education and began an organization that was dedicated to working with people with really severe abuse. We thought we had a sign over our door that said, if it's somebody you feel you can't see, send them to us, And I also got to train interns in doing long-term deep work around trauma, and found that extremely fulfilling and rewarding to get to do that. Then in 2003, I heard Dan Siegel speak for the first time, and all the hair stood up on the back of my neck as he was talking about the neuroscience that related to what we were doing. And I just felt it was so important, really, really important. And so over the next 5 years, I was in a study group once a month with Dan, and that really laid the foundation. And then we began to bring in the work of Steve Porges, and eventually Ian McGilchrist's book came out in 2009, and Marco Iacoboni and Jaak Panksepp, and began to integrate these pieces into our practice of therapy. And so eventually, Dan was instrumental. I had written just a training manual for our interns, and was incorporating interpersonal neurobiology, and Dan was my consultant. And so he one day said, I think we should print this, and that was the first book. And I had no thought that that's what was going to happen, but that was really the beginning. And I do love writing so much, so then there've been 2 other books since then, and chapters here and there and all that kind of thing. But mainly what I see is that the neuroscience really stabilizes us as therapists. The knowledge of it stabilizes us so we can be more fully present. And really that's what I'm dedicated to, is those 2 things: sharing what knowledge I feel like I've been given by these people and how it works together, and then really opening into presence so that people can move into the work that they need to do. So I have all these kind of people behind me that I'm really grateful for.
Great. Listen, that's great, Bonnie. Thank you for that introduction. So again, one of the things I really kind of appreciate about your webinars and about your training is that you always start with a little settling exercise to settle our nervous systems and to connect more with our heart. So would it be okay if we start with that for a few minutes?
Yes, we can do that. We'll do a little shorter version than the one that we're going to be doing all together at the beginning of each of the webinars when we do it, but it'll give a little taste. And before I do that, I also want to acknowledge the land that I'm blessed to be on here, and that the traditional caretakers are the Chimicum, the Squalam, and the Coast Salish, who continue now to care for the land, and whose wisdom and instruction I always welcome, because I so revere the indigenous ways of keeping everything together and nurturing it. It's very important. And I have great sorrow over how we've treated our indigenous people, and great appreciation for their continued presence in our lives. So with that in mind, let's just settle into our bodies a little bit. Just kind of notice how your feet would like to rest, perhaps on the ground, or if you're sitting cross-legged, how your body wants to settle. And then let's come into relationship with the earth. So if your feet are on the ground, just dropping your awareness down to our feet, we'll just drop down from there into the earth. And sense how our living body is dramatically and ongoingly connected to the living body of the earth in whatever way that comes to us. And just resting there for a moment, and noticing that at times our minds run away, because that's what minds do, and then we can just gently bring our minds back again to feet and earth. And then from there, let's just draw our attention upward until we come to our bellies, which is the home of this remarkable brain that's the guardian of our safety, this belly brain that's always watching out for us and feels comfortable. We can just place a hand there and just arrive and listen, not seeking to change anything, but just being present to this brain. Now continuing on up to the area of our heart and chest. Again, I find it helpful to just place a hand there. You can do that if it feels helpful to you. And then with this heart, knowing again there's a brain there, there's a remarkable bunch of neurons that help us sense about how connection is for us right in this moment. And then let's bring our attention to the breath, our beautiful breath, just as it is right now, the in-breath and the out-breath. Just sensing how this flow is there all the time, supporting us every moment of our life. Perhaps noticing how we breathe with the trees, that our exhalation is the tree's inhalation, the tree's exhalation is our inhalation. Just sensing the beauty of that flow. Then on the next inhalation, on the exhalation, just inviting our awareness to expand into a bowl of receptivity that welcomes everything that's arising within our own system, sensations, thoughts, feelings, whatever is there, anything coming in from the outside world through the senses, and just welcoming it as best we can in this particular moment. Just welcoming all as best we can. And then from there, let's invite our awareness now to spread out to include everybody who's here with us today and everybody who will listen to this later on as we begin to come back into outer awareness again. Just gradually, slowly opening eyes, and sometimes our bodies want to stretch a bit after being still as we come back into connection with each other. These transitions from the busyness of our life into being here together, sometimes a practice like this can really help. And then this opening into a kind of non-judgmental welcoming, to me, is the heart and the foundation of therapy. And so that practice can get us ready then to whoever is coming our way, whether it's our child or our client or us together here now with this sense of welcome. So that's why we end there.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie. That was beautiful. And got to mention that the webinar series is called The Heart of Trauma, Healing Our Embodied Brains in the Context of Relationships. Mm-hmm. So that's the name. And I just, to start, Bonnie, one of the interesting things, the webinars, The Heart of Trauma. So could you give us a definition of trauma from an IPNB perspective?
Yeah, we can really talk about that because so often we hear trauma talked about as though it's overwhelming events. And what research is beginning to show us is that that is not quite accurate. Yes, an overwhelming event as our system perceives it to be. But the nature of the overwhelm is often because there's nobody with us to help us hold it. So we talk about trauma as potential traumas when something that's scary or hurtful happens to us. And then if we have the people around us, or we've internalized people within us so that we can integrate the experience, it never becomes an embedded trauma. But if we don't have that, then that trauma will embed as though it's being held, carefully held, until there's help that can help us to integrate it. So our system actually knows how to bring that trauma into the subcortical and the body and hold it there so it's not in conscious awareness all the time. Mm. So I've come to think about trauma not so much as what happens to us, but who's with us before, during, and after an experience that allows us to be able to literally integrate that into our system, or if not, then to hold it for a later time of integration. Those can be very small things. I often think of kids in preschool that have these little small pools of trauma. Maybe they're shamed during the day, or they see things that scare them, and there's no one there that can really attend to each individual child. And so that child maybe comes home and then falls apart at home. And if the parent sends them away or doesn't comfort them, then that's going to embed as this little pool of trauma that nobody's here to help me. Nobody really cares about me enough to help me with the upset inside of me. But if the parent instead can gather that child onto his or her lap and let that child process that through, then that child's able to integrate it and go on without taking in this sense of no one will help me. So it's even small things that can be overwhelming for us. And imagine, I mean, in the midst of a pandemic, and here in the midst of the racial reckoning that's going on, that's way overdue, in the midst of the political mess we've found ourselves in and still do. I mean, there's so many pressures on us every day that we can't process through all the way. So we're all accumulating these experiences. And there's some amazing research that we'll talk about in the webinar about the importance of this before, during, and after, of having people with us, and that's really what sets the stage for whether traumas really stay with us and will have to be worked with later or not.
Okay, so the big consequence of trauma is kind of a lack of empathic witness.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a witness to the experience.
Yes, either on the outside, or if we've had the wonderful experience of having people be with us through our lives pretty regularly, we often have built an inner community that is able to help hold us as well. I know I can just think about 2 or 3 people with whom I'm particularly close, and I feel my system settle. Mm-hmm. And I know that even if something out in the world has scared me or, hurt me in some way, that I can be in their presence, and that also helps. So it isn't only what's outside, but also what we've internalized and can really call on in times that are, very challenging for us.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so if we just move on a little, Bonnie, so I just put together a few questions that I was kind of curious about. And the first one is, why is non-judgmental presence so important in facilitating safety in the counseling room?
Yeah, I mean, I love what Steve Porges says, which is safety is the treatment. That only if our system feels safe are we going to be able to become vulnerable enough to actually bring forward what it is that needs healing. Because otherwise, if we don't have a sense of safety in our bodies, it's very difficult to not be pushing back in a way that makes it hard for our systems to respond. And it turns out that the thing that makes us feel the most safe is when we are received by somebody with no judgments, and probably even harder, especially in our therapeutic environment these days, with no agenda, just welcoming you as you are with a kind of warm curiosity and a sense that I have wide open emotional arms for whatever it is you're bringing this day. I haven't thought about in advance that I need to use this technique or that technique, or that we're going to be doing this thing or that today, or that I need to know the answer. Because I think if there's anything I've learned in my 30 years of doing this, it's that the wisdom about what needs healing and and even in a lot of ways about how to go about it is in my clients. It's not in me. I don't know what's going on in there. I don't know what needs to come up next. I don't know that, but their system has a wisdom about it that's quite remarkable. And if things feel safe enough as my person comes into the room and they feel that I'm just there with them, open, and I will often say, what comes with you today? You know, what comes with you today? And I want to listen to that and be with that. And then as they're speaking to me, if I'm really receiving it, something will often arise in me to give back. It may be, I notice they're looking at my sand tray collection or something, and I say, I'm wondering if sand tray is calling you today. Check inside and see. And they might say, no, I was looking at that one figure, but that isn't what it feels like, you know, it would be important today. Or they might say, yes, let's go there. But I'm always wanting to have such deep respect for their own wisdom and their own knowing, and really fostering that and helping that build up as the guide. And then I get to respond, and then they respond to me, and we get this beautiful dance going back and forth in that way, but always beginning with them.
So I have a few thoughts. The innate wisdom that you talk about, do you see that similar to what Stephen Porges talks about as neuroception?
I think there is certainly a neuroception, and if I really am there non-judgmentally and open to that person and really deeply interested in them and trusting that they have something of value to bring, there's going to be a neuroception of safety that opens the door. But there's all kinds of wisdom in our bodies. I mean, the most remarkable thing I think I've learned in all, you know, in these some 17 years now of studying this is how much our bodies lean toward healing. Like we have an attachment system that has the anticipation of being met by warmth. And so if some of the wounds to our attachments can be soothed, that natural movement toward attachment is right there. The ventral branch, the social engagement branch of the nervous system, is preferred, and anytime it can, it will come forward. We have a play system in our midbrain, and the minute we feel safe and connected, play becomes a possibility. So we have these enormous resources of innate health in our bodies that have gotten all tangled up by the ways that we have been wounded, and so they aren't free to express, but they're right there wanting to. And so as we provide a place for the traumas to be held and cared for, this natural kind of wisdom comes forward. One thing just to say one more thing about that, Liam, one of the earliest things with Dan Siegel's work that was so powerful for me is the idea that our brains already have the capacity in them to organize, to become more whole. But we can't say they're self-organizing because it requires the presence of another from the beginning of life and all the way through to co-organize with the person. But if I'm here as a therapist and someone brings some very painful memory and we're able to sink down in it and give it what it needs by way of comfort or safety or whatever it's calling for, once that is there, then the brain on its own knows how to incorporate that and move toward more wholeness. So I really, really not only respect, but kind of marvel at the kinds of resources that even what looks like the most broken person is bringing into the room. And I try to never forget it, because that can help them feel that in themselves, that they have latent resources of unimaginable value and beauty.
Okay. And is it a particular type of presence that you're attempting to foster, say, in yourself, Bonnie? Is it kind of, more of a right brain presence than a left brain presence?
Yeah, this is where Ian McGilchrist's work comes in. And when we start the webinars, with the very first one, we're going to be talking primarily about Porges and about McGilchrist. And almost everybody's heard of Porges at this point, thank heavens, which is wonderful. But not everybody is familiar with Ian's work. And Ian talks about the two hemispheres of the brain, which we will talk about a lot, about the architecture of them and all of that. But in a nutshell, which is hard to do because his book is this thick, but we'll try it anyway. I got to interview him once, and he said, if anybody handed me a book this thick, I'd say, it's too big to read. I'm not going to read it. So, but it's really worth every every moment we invest in it. But he talks about how the two hemispheres of the brain don't do separate things, but they see the world differently. So the right hemisphere is all about relationship. So when you talk about a right hemisphere presence, yes, that presence that is without judgment, without agenda, and is devoted to what's happening in the relationship in this moment, that's the presence that brings safety. And that's what makes room for vulnerability. And then the person's system begins to offer up what next needs healing. But the left hemisphere is also really important because the left hemisphere is the place where we could have a lot of knowledge about how this is what I think it was my left hemisphere that lit up when I heard Dan speak that first time, because it's like he was giving me some beautiful knowledge about what's actually happening. And if we can understand how this beautiful nervous system works, it gives us like a solid platform to stand on, so that then we can open into this presence that's just receptive and open and caring. And then that gives us the ability to respond. If we're truly deeply listening, we'll find a response begins to arise. So it's very much of a right hemisphere, but supported by the left. He calls the right hemisphere the master, Ian does, and the left hemisphere the emissary, and that the emissary is essential to stabilizing the master so that he or she can focus on what's actually happening in the moment.
Yeah. We often get a question, quite often from therapists, and they talk about when they go into that kind of right brain way of relating, that one of the things that they notice is that they actually can notice their own kind of traumatic history coming up.
Yes. Yes, indeed. If we open into the right hemisphere, we can certainly have those things arise. And I think it's really important for all of us to be humble enough to notice it and know that it's natural and human, that it's not something wrong or bad. Because if we think it's something bad that shouldn't be happening, we'll push it away. Most likely try to get rid of it, and that won't help at all. So when that begins to happen, sometimes it's coming up in a way that lets us connect with a similar trauma, because it's not upsetting our system too much. It's just coming up as an awareness. Like, I understand that. My whole body understands what this person is talking about, because I too have felt abandoned. That can provide for a very deep empathic connection. And the person will feel it. Alan Shore talks so much about right hemisphere to right hemisphere communication with no words. And of course, Steve Porges also talks about how the look on our face and the quality of our breath and the way we listen and the quality of our voice and all of that communicates our connection with the client as well. And so there's all these ways that if I'm feeling my own abandonment, but not in a way that it takes me away, but then joining with the person, there's going to be a deep felt sense of being understood and being seen.
Okay.
But sometimes something gets touched in our own implicit memory and it wells up bigger than that. And we begin to lose our ability to kind of hold both our own response and another person's response. And in those moments, we'll do something about it. I mean, usually we'll either begin to blend with the person and maybe we both get anxious, or we begin to shift into our left hemisphere and move away from connection. I mean, there's various ways that we can manage that. So I think it's really wonderful to be able to have certain things that we know that we can do that help to bring us back into our own bodies and into more sense of connection. So there's 3 things that work for me, and these may not work for anybody else on this call. They work for me. And I know this because I played around with lots of different things to see what it is that helps me come back. So my suggestion would be, I'm just sharing these, but we need to each find our own, what works for us. But if I can really ground my feet, push my feet into the earth, into the carpet, knowing the earth is underneath there, I begin to feel almost as though the energies of the earth stabilize me. Some people like to go up into light. That doesn't stabilize me. The earth stabilizes me, I have discovered. So I do that. Sometimes if I have a drink of water, And feeling the water go down helps to stabilize me. And the thing that almost invariably works the best is, again, those 2 or 3 people, 2 people in particular that live inside me, that have given me so much in my life by way of love and care and healing and all of that. I can just bring them to mind and I feel my whole system settle.
Amazing.
So those are the things I do. And other people, rubbing hands from, say, the top of your thighs down to your knees a little bit, just doing that gesture can sometimes help. Breathing sometimes, for whatever reason, breathing deeper does nothing for me at those moments, but it does for a lot of people to take in a little bit more slow breathing. And if you emphasize the exhale, it helps to bring into ventral for most people. Again, for whatever reason, it's not particularly effective for me, but it may be the key to the whole thing for somebody else here on the call. But then I also always say to that part of me inside, I say, whoever's upset in there, I will come back to you later. And that often settles things. I say it in my mind, I just say, I'll be back.
Okay.
And then I make sure to make time to go back. And I do Santre, and so often I go back by going to the figures and saying, show me. Sometimes nothing happens, but at least I've made the commitment to that part of me that I care about what your response is and you matter. And right now I need to do this.
Absolutely. Great, Bonnie. We could. There's so much in that. This really is. So some of what you're talking about is meeting and healing implicit memory.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just kind of curious, what type of therapeutic experiences change the felt sense of implicit memory? Just begin.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, I know that's a big question now, but just,
Okay. Sure. Yeah, we're just kind of talking a little bit. Again, I think it's the 3rd webinar is going to be devoted to this whole topic of implicit memory. And by implicit memory, we mean memories that live in the body in the wake of any experience. And some of them fill us with joy. Some of us make our chest feel warm and our face smile and all of this kind of thing, because we have these wonderful implicit memories. And then we're also storing trauma in the body in that way too, that we have implicit memory. So we're talking about bodily sensations. We're talking about emotions. We're talking about what they call a behavioral impulse, like the memory as it comes up makes you feel either like you want to pull away or move toward. And we're talking also about how it shifts perception when we're talking about implicit memory. So I can be walking down the street and being fine, and all of a sudden I feel scared and I don't even know why. And it's because something has waked up in my body, either because something woke up inside me or I saw something in the outside world that touched a memory in me and brought it up, but didn't bring it up as a story. It brought it up as a felt sense in my body. So I can't tell whether it's happening now or in the past because it feels like right now because it's coming up in my body. So that's, again, a very quick nutshell of implicit memory. So for a long time, it was thought, probably until the last 20 years, it was thought that the felt sense of the implicit memory could never change. But what could happen is it could be regulated. In other words, we could get enough brain integration, neural integration around it that it wouldn't be so welling up and awakening and bothering us all the time. But then the science of memory reconsolidation started roughly maybe 20 years ago. I'm not very good on the dates, but it's not that old. And what we began to understand is that implicit memory can change because the neural net holding a memory under 2 conditions can open and something new can come in. And those 2 conditions is that the implicit memory needs to be awake in the body. So that means the fear needs to be felt or the grief needs to be felt. It can't just be thought about. It's not just me thinking about this memory. It's arising in my body. And then that the felt sense of this is Bruce Ecker's work, is what he calls a disconfirming experience comes and meets that memory. So if this is grief, I'm having an upwelling of grief, then the disconfirming experience for that would be comfort. So if somebody says words of comfort to me, that doesn't do it. It's the felt sense of them wanting to give that comfort. Then that neural net opens and that feeling of comfort goes in and actually changes the memory. Maybe even more important than that, the person was feeling alone in their grief, and now they're internalizing me into that neural net. So now they're no longer alone. And that goes back to what we talked about earlier, that really the essence of trauma is being alone in pain and fear and nobody really being there with you. And so now as this neural net opens and I get internalized, this person who's with me, if it's my neural net, is internalized in there. What I hear with my clients is, instead of them saying, I had this experience, it's like when I think of that, I see us there. There's a we now that's surrounding and holding this experience.
Okay. And
so there's a whole science to the change of implicit memory that we didn't know about till fairly recently that is deeply heartening and wonderful.
So, like some of the work I do with touch, and since the lockdown, since the pandemic, we're doing a lot of the transforming touch sessions online. It's called transforming intentional touch. And one of the things that often happens is that, if I'm with a client and they're in a grieving process, I'll feel the grief coming up my throat.
Yeah.
And I've no doubt some of that is mine, and sometimes it's hard to differentiate whose grief it is. But is it like that experience that I'm feeling the grief at the same time as them? Or is it
That's the beginning. That's the beginning. But the second step is the natural. When we feel sorrow inside of us, when we feel grief, this is midbrain. This is Jaak Panksepp's work in the midbrain. And also Marco Iacoboni and the mirror neurons. So you can see how all these systems are supportive together. So if you're feeling grief and I see grief in your face, through my mirror neuron system and through the fact that I have felt grief before, I'll begin to resonate with your grief. But then there's a second kind of mirror neurons that instigate what you would say is the next step in the dance, which means my desire to comfort you comes out. That's when the neural net opens. It's when I begin to feel this comfort towards you. And I may say words with it, I likely will, but it's the felt sense of the comfort coming towards your grief.
Okay.
And that's the way it works in the midbrain too, because when the grief system wakes up and we resonate with somebody, what happens is that the care system then in the midbrain wakes up to come and take care of the grief.
Okay.
So it's that it's what you need. It's what we needed at the time, but wasn't available. And when it arrives, it opens this whole system and it brings it in. And then about 5 hours later, that neural net will reconsolidate and hold that new experience in it.
Okay. Brilliant.
So beautiful. Well, it is so wonderful. And Bruce Ecker has collected all the research around this. I think every single piece of it, although I could be wrong about that, but he's a brilliant synthesizer of all that we know about memory reconsolidation. So very, very important work, because if you think about it, the left hemisphere story of what happened to us in a trauma is sad often or whatever it is, but it's the felt sense in the body that wells up over and over and over again that makes life so terribly, terribly difficult. So we need to do more than talk the story. We need to actually get in and have these neural nets that are holding the trauma really changed, which can take a long time. I mean, if you had a parent that hated you and that was your experience every day, imagine the neural real estate that's occupied by that, and how often we need to go there and how long it takes to bring the love and the care into that area where the hate has lived. So it can take, it's not a quick thing, but it's I know from my own healing how important it is and how possible it is, even with terrible abuse, for things to really change.
Great, Bonnie. So I think at this stage we've really covered, you really covered a lot, and I thank you for that. So we might bring one or two people in at this stage just to see have they any questions. So Robert, could you bring Anna in, please? Okay.
There she is, Anna.
Yes. So welcome, Anna. You might unmute yourself, please, and turn on your camera. What happens sometimes is that people don't realize they have their hand up and they get brought in. it's
and then they want to run out again.
it's a big shock then.
Or just say hi if that happens.
Yeah. Okay, so Anna, you're muted and your camera's still off. And what we might do is just might bring in somebody else. And Anna can come back in then again if she wants. Robert, could you bring in, I think it's Chad, C-H-A-D, please. Welcome, Chad. You might unmute yourself and turn on your camera, please.
There you are. Hi, Chad.
Oh,
hello.
Hi.
Oh, there you are. Yes. So,
well, I don't have a specific question or anything yet, but I've been listening to your talk and getting into this, and I've noted a couple of the authors and books that you mentioned, and I wondered if at some point we could get a list of some of these names you've been dropping. I'd like to look into some of them. I've got a couple of them written down, but
yeah, I mean, I'm happy to provide those, and I know that we have certainly a bibliography list inside the in the webinar. But I'd be glad to.
Yeah.
Did you get Ian McGilchrist's name? Was that one of the ones you caught?
I actually think I did get that one.
Yeah, and it's the Master and his Emissary.
I'm sorry, what was the title?
The Master and his Emissary. And then the gentleman I just mentioned is Bruce Ecker, E-C-K-E-R. And the name of his book is Unlocking the Emotional Brain.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a start anyway. And then,
Yes. I'm really getting into Dan Siegel. I just discovered him not too long ago, and I've already taken a couple of his books in, and I'm going to go back and reread them.
Yes,
there's a lot in there.
Yes, the Developing Mind is like the seminal book, and that it requires very slow, careful, 7 times reading for sure. But that's the foundation, and then all of his other books, in one way or another, spring out of that. And so I think that's the best. That's an essential place to start. But it's not an easy read. But it's really.
So that's why I say I'm going to have to go back and take it in again. But it's filling my brain. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Another one is trauma sensitive mindfulness.
Huh.
I'm taking that one in because I'm doing a MBSR, and people get surprised sometimes when they're just teaching, for example, meditation.
Right.
Sometimes, and you touched on that, like for you, the breathing might trigger something instead of anchor someone.
Yes.
And so
it is. I mean, it's very important with trauma survivors to be careful about using mindfulness, and especially about sending them home with a mindfulness practice. If they're in the office with you, there's the containment, there's that connection, there's this, there's this holding that's there for them, but they might try to do it, and that might set something off right in the office. But if we do a practice in the office and then say, go try it at home, I always say, if anything at all begins to stir in you that's uncomfortable, just stop right away, go outside, walk around, whatever, and then but I don't offer those kinds of practices with severe trauma survivors at all for a long time.
Yeah, that makes
Because
sense.
there's other kinds of mindfulness. I help them be mindful of their body, what's happening in their body, building up that capacity, and our mindfulness of each other. We're here in this room together. We're attending to each other.
Yeah.
So that kind of mindfulness is much more apt to be regulating, whereas just being still, trying to be still in your own mind, can set off a tremendous storm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Chad. Could we bring in Mina next, please, Robert? Welcome, Mina.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Hello, Mina.
I am so thrilled to be part of your webinar. I already signed up many moons ago. And because of this introduction, I understand how much it can help me, and I think a lot of other people, because I'm a big fan of Dan Siegel, Steve Porges, and all the different people that you mentioned, but bringing it all together in the work that you do. So I wanted to, first of all, say I love the way you're not saying my client or my, where you're saying my person. I love that. Thank you for that. And the second thing is that I just interviewed a new person. I just interviewed a new person. And she said that there are no issues, but she feels that she's all in her mind and she's cut off from her body. So she's tremendously successful. Her mother has a PhD in psychology. She's a psychologist, and it's her mother who recommended my work. I'm a somatic experience practitioner. And she said, I just feel like I'm missing out. And she seems very personable. She has a thriving business. She has a husband and she has children, one child. So I wanted to ask you, with someone who is evidently accomplished in her life, that springs from her left brain, how would you go about working with her? Or is that too much of a question for this?
Let me say a little bit, and then again, we can get into this more. I mean, it sounds like, and I'm, of course, just guessing as we all are, you just started with her, we don't know for sure, but it sounds as though she may have what we would call an avoidant attachment. That everything is about task, everything is about being successful, about being socially personable, and that this is what allowed for the bond in the family home, perhaps. I mean, this is, again, I'd have to hear a lot more from her about what her experience was with her parents. Because sometimes people will say, my parents supported everything, they sent me to college, and then you ask, what happened when you were sad? It's like, oh, and we were never sad. Right? And you begin to go, okay. So there's often a whole pool of emotions that have gone unseen and are underground. And if you stay in your left hemisphere, you don't have to know the anguish of that.
Okay.
So it often happens that it's a very slow entry into the more right hemisphere territory where that pain is, but it has to be really slow, because if it is turn out that has parents who are both pretty left shifted, and that was the price of belonging. I mean, that's one question we ask: what was the price of belonging in this family? And for people who have very intellectualized households and very success-driven households, the price is we leave our emotional nature in the dust and our bodies in the dust.
Yeah.
So again, I don't know if that's what it is, but it helps me, and I know this is somewhat different from somatic experiencing, but it helps me to hear a history and hear how the person talks about what experience was like, what was emotional experience like. And if it's all like kind of feels surfacey, then I ask questions like, what happened when you were sad? How was that? How was anger in your family? Were you ever lonely? What was that like? And that kind of thing, to get at a little more the kinds of information they can't tell you because they don't know about it in their cognitive brain.
Right.
So,
well, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you May 1st. Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you too, Mina. Thank you for your questions.
Thanks, Mina. So what we'll do, Bonnie, is we'll bring in one more person, and then we'll ask one or two questions in the Q&A.
Okay.
And just to say, we're back again next week on the 15th, next Thursday night, and the link is going out for that tonight, so anybody wants to register for that. And if we don't get around to any of your question tonight, there's another night, which is great. So, Robert, could you bring in Greta, please?
And next week, we're going to talk about the myth of self-regulation, which sometimes is a stirring topic. Hi, Greta.
Hi. It's nice to finally see you in person. And Chad's one of my students, so I'm really happy he's here. I was wondering if you could comment briefly on the titration between the dorsal and ventral vagal systems through that process of over and under coupling to make that sense of felt safety, as the co-regulation between facilitator and experiencer gains safety, and then when those nonverbal, non-cognitive memories start to surface, and those wounds, those attachment wounds with our primary attachment systems and within those family systems start to show in the body, and we get the numbness and then the overfeeling and then the numbness and the overfeeling, and how to move from the high and low tone dorsal spaces into those ventral spaces, and the bounce back and forth as that titration increases, so that sense of felt safety becomes more readily accessible. I hope that makes sense.
Maybe, and if it does, if I'm missing your point, you'll tell me, okay?
Yes.
So I think that again, if I am as fully open and present as I can be, that will elicit eventually the ability of the person to be vulnerable. And as they're vulnerable, whatever memory needs to arise, implicit, will come up and will bring with it a nervous system activation. And that nervous system activation will be the one that's connected to this implicit memory. It may be dorsal, and it may go into sympathetic. And I think, as you were talking about how the nervous system moves around, am I hearing that? Okay. So what I go back to, that to me is one of the most important things that Steve Porges can convey, is connection's a biological imperative. And if I'm in a certain state, my person is going to be more apt to move toward that state. So my primary thing that I want to do is, as the person is becoming more activated, and as that's resonating in my system, is make sure that I've got a big, wide open ventral window to receive that. This then begins to activate their ventral system to whatever degree that it can. So if someone is in dorsal, I'm going to want to, how Steve Porges talks about, you can borrow the energies of dorsal into ventral and sympathetic into ventral. So if my person is in dorsal, I'm going to borrow the energies of dorsal to meet him or her there and be there. And if they begin to move up into that, we'll do it together, and it'll go up here, and I'll be borrowing more of the energies of sympathetic, probably automatically through resonance, to be with them. And the question I'm asking along the way as we move around in here is, can you feel me with you? Because as long as the person can feel me with them, there is enough ventral in our joined relationship for healing to happen and for the disconfirming experience to come in. If they can't feel me any longer, and when they're in that state, I've never had somebody not know the answer to that question, because they're in such a right hemisphere state at that point, they know whether they can still feel me with them or not. So if they can feel me, we just move ahead and we keep moving back and forth together, with my system pretty much following theirs, and I'm, talking to them maybe about whatever it is, but it's actually my system tracking, I think, that begins to help hold and regulate this. If they can't feel me, then job number one is to get back into connection, so we come away from the memory, whatever ways we do that. And we will have explored just what we were talking about earlier, what kinds of things are good resources for kind of getting the connection back. Some of my people might want me to put a blanket on them. Some of the people might want a glass of water. Some people like to look around and notice the room. No one thing works for everybody. I have one person whose absolute go-to is the clumpy sand I have in my sand trays. And as soon as she starts to squeeze that, her nervous system just completely settles. So we explore what that is. And then once we're reconnected and we can feel one another again, then we may go back toward the memory or not. And I always will say, do you want to go back toward it? Ask your system, or shall we rest together? Because there's a lot of value in resting together in ventral, in that social engagement ventral system. When the person hasn't done that, we're building it when we get some time to just rest. So even if it was 20 minutes of just resting quietly in ventral together, it's building neural strength in that system. So I don't know, does that kind of touch what you were talking about? Yeah, it's what most of the work is about, isn't it? I mean, is that kind of thing. Thank you very much, Greta.
Great, thanks, Greta. Okay, so I think we have time for one question. I'll go with the first question that came in to be as fair as possible. So it's from Maria. What are Bonnie's thoughts about EMDR, and is it possible to heal trauma without it?
Yes, it's possible to heal trauma without it, because I don't do EMDR, even though I respect it very greatly, and I have not had it as a person who's recovered, and I don't offer it, and I see people recover. So yes, it is. But I tremendously respect EMDR as a way to provide for integration between the hemispheres, which ultimately has to happen with these implicit memories, and with the memories where the thoughts and the feelings begin to come together and all of that. So I think EMDR is wonderful. My struggle with it has been that it has become a protocol. It was discovered by Francine Shapiro by her eyes automatically doing something to integrate. And then what we often do is we begin to turn things into protocols. And when they're in a protocol, if I'm thinking about the protocol, I am likely not very much in my right hemisphere. And I found that in studying EMDR a bit, it tended to pull me into my left hemisphere. This isn't about EMDR, it's about me. I would get caught up in the steps, and then I wasn't as present with my people. So for me, it's not something I want to offer because it doesn't match my inner way of working. But I think it's extremely valuable. And I also see that sometimes, often when we're working in a memory, people's eyes begin to do the back and forth all on their own at times too, because it is a natural process. So I have, again, deep respect for it. I think what we want to try to do for our people is to get so good at it that we're not thinking about protocol any longer, and we're actually following our people into their deeper world and stopping when they want to, and altering the protocol when it doesn't suit them, and all of that, to become flexible around it, so that we're not doing it from a more left hemisphere, this step, this step, this step, this step kind of thing, which tends to pull away from connection. We can talk a lot more about this if you happen to be in the webinar, but that's just a quick summary of that.
Okay, so the hour has absolutely flown by, Bonnie.
Yes.
It really has. And a big thank you. I've really enjoyed our interaction, and I've really enjoyed our conversation. And as I get your knowledge is immense, and I kind of really thank you for letting us have it tonight. It's been wonderful.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for being here, and I'll look forward to seeing you perhaps next week, and we'll continue on. I mean, I feel like I pulled a lot out, and maybe too much, and if it was overwhelming, I apologize. It's so hard to take these huge things and try to get them down into something smaller, but maybe we got a taste anyway, and I'm very grateful you're here.
absolutely. And just to say a big thank you to everybody that joined, and a big thank you to Robert and Mary that were in the background that made this possible.
Yeah.
And just to say that we're back on the 15th, which is next Thursday night, and we're going to be talking about the myth of self-regulation, which is fascinating again. I've heard your podcast on it, Bonnie, and it's amazing. And again, there'll be time for questions, and we'll bring people in again. And hopefully, if we didn't get in tonight, you'll be able to join us next week. And then we start on the 1st of May. And Mary, you might just post the link for the webinar series for anybody that wants to sign up. And as well, you might post the link if anybody wants to purchase the CPD cert for tonight. So listen, until next week, Bonnie, I look forward to seeing you, and have a great week.
Thank you, you too. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.